Good afternoon, everybody. I am thrilled to be here at the Philly ETE conference. Hoping that you had a good conference. I actually just landed this morning from a trip to Tokyo, so the jet lag has not hit me yet. My name is Charran. I work for Microsoft. I'm a chief architect of our data insights group at Microsoft. And basically what that means is I look after a lot of technologies associated with artificial intelligence and emerging technologies like blockchain and, of course, what Microsoft calls conversations as a platform. So my whole goal here today is to not have this be a Microsoft commercial. So I went through from my Tokyo trip and scrubbed all of the slides that talks about all of our frameworks and stuffed them in an appendix at the end. So this is just to talk about beyond bots, embracing what Microsoft calls conversations as a platform. So based on the attendance today, everybody has either had a mandate from their manager or just has a general interest in bots as a technology. And so my role as being a global role, I get to see what a lot of customers and organizations are doing with bots all around the world. So today, what I want to talk to you about is what bots are, but before that, I thought we'd start with a good level set of what artificial intelligence is, then talk about what bots are historically all the way leading up to today, and then talk about conversations as a platform. What does that term mean, and why is it different than bot technologies? And then talk about some solution approaches and conversational examples. So the hope and goal here is that we're not going to go down to a 300 or 400 level in the technologies. If you're anybody from a lawyer to an administrative assistant to a deep technology person, hopefully this talk will hit a sweet spot somewhere along the way. So let's talk about artificial intelligence. Whenever I go talk to customers, which I spend a lot of my time doing, I have to dispel what I call the Skynet effect. Everybody here has probably seen Terminator, right? And everybody probably knows of a salesperson, maybe you're in the room, that's actually talking to somebody and says, well, you just throw a little bit of artificial intelligence there and the solution will come alive, right? So science fiction has done us the favor of placing a heavy amount of expectations on artificial intelligence and its applicability. Many of the technology-minded folks in the room know we're emerging from what's called the AI winter. Basically, from the 70s and 80s up until now, nothing was done in artificial intelligence except in Hollywood. And so now we're actually trying to combat that because we actually have technologies that allow us to implement artificial intelligence for real this time. But if you think about artificial intelligence, the way to describe it to the layperson is we've spent decades teaching ourselves the languages to talk to computers to get them to do what we want them to do. We write lines and lines, millions of lines of Java code. We write different types of components and controllers and MVC, all this stuff, only to get a website to show up in the right colors and to have the right experience, right? So lots of effort associated with getting computers to do what we want. But now we're at a time with advents like cloud computing and all these different technological advancements where computers can actually now have the ability to understand human beings without having to program millions of lines of code. So understanding that that's the basis and goal of artificial intelligence, how does Microsoft and how do I think about artificial intelligence? Well, we think about it in two categories. The first category is foundational capabilities over on the left. These are the top 4 or 5 data science problems, right? Making recommendations based on historical data. Help advise humans on a course of action. What should I do given historical data? Predicting an outcome. What's going to happen, right? There's an entire field of advanced analytics called predictive analytics. Distinguishing outliers and groupings. Basically, this is the is this weird section of what artificial intelligence and machine learning can do. Are these things the same, similar, or is something weird here that you probably need to know about? All of these things are foundational capabilities, custom machine learning models, and artificial intelligence capabilities that can be included into what we call a smarter application. Over the course of maybe about 12 to 18 months, we've seen companies like Microsoft, IBM, and others start to take some of these foundational capabilities, which require a lot of knowledge about data science, and package them up into black box, configurable machine learning services that you can actually use in your applications without having a deep data science background. So you can take some of these services that allow your application to understand vision, content, text, emotional states, and be able to bundle those into your applications to make what we call smarter applications. And by the way, the definition of a smarter application is one in which the application not only services us in specific ways, but it begins to develop a deeper understanding of who we are as individuals, how we're using the application, and what are the ways in which it can actually get smarter to service us better. So there's some type of learning involved there. So that's artificial intelligence. And again, there's a lot of, and you guys are probably facing this every day, there's a lot of expectations on what artificial intelligence can do, but it's important that we kind of level set and say that these are the careful ways in which we need to implement artificial intelligence. So implementing artificial intelligence has specific requirements. Anybody can actually pick up one of these configurable machine learning models, either from an algorithm store and implement it in a solution. But even if you're focusing on the foundational areas in which you say, you know what, none of those closed box artificial intelligence models are going to work for me, I actually need to develop my own recommender engine or my own predictive analytics engine. It takes somebody with deep expertise in computer science, statistics, mathematics, to be able to put some of these things together. So expertise in developing AI-based solutions along the data science lines, a foundation in machine learning, and being able to access algorithm stores so that we're not reinventing custom models all the time, that we're actually reusing and giving back to a community. But probably the most important bullet point here is the ability to operationalize. Now, operationalization of machine learning models means that you're actually taking that machine learning model that you crafted over a sprint in a project and put it into the real world where it is now making decisions, and it's being used by not only individuals or people, but applications. So if you take the most foundational example of a machine learning model, one that determines creditworthiness. Every time you get those little flyers in the snail mail that says, you've been accepted for a higher credit limit, visit this link now to figure out how big your credit limit's going to be. When you visit it, it actually asks you a few interesting questions like how much do you make and how old are you and have you rented or do you own? And then it actually says, please don't hit the back button. And then you see the little thing going back and forth. It's running it through a machine learning model to determine your credit worthiness. So we've been working with a customer, a large bank in Europe, that actually did not operationalize their machine learning model correctly, meaning they didn't monitor it. They didn't look to see what it was doing and the decisions that it was making, nor did they choose to retrain it over time. And so what ended up happening is, strangely enough, it started having what appeared to be random declines in credit worthiness. And so upon further investigation, and when we got involved, we actually found out that it was declining all women. Strangely enough, right? So that is a completely unacceptable situation. So while the lawyers kind of spun up into high gear to saying, well, are we liable for this? This is awful. We went to work on the technology side to say, well, show me the record of the decisions that it's made over the past 3 months. Then show me the algorithms that you implemented. And they're like, that data science guy left like 2 months ago. We don't really understand what's happening. So operationalization and then understanding liability, that your machine learning model is basically like a 3-year-old child. The more good you show it over time, the better decisions it will make. However, just like regular humans, you forget if you're not constantly reminded. So we need to retrain. Focus and productivity. So the old days in which you could implement a machine learning model and say, I'm performing such computer science wizardry, I'm going to take 6 months. And people would be like, all right. And then they would give you the license to go and just perform a fantastic model, which you would implement 6 months later. But what would happen is the business and application requirements will change significantly by then, maybe like 3 times over. So the days in which you could say, all right, I'm going into my cave and I'm going to build this awesome machine learning model and come down like the 10 Commandments, that's kind of over. So we have to be faster. We have to be faster at data science. We have to be faster at operationalization and implementation. So focus on productivity. Don't invent, reuse. Be able to make sure that there's not an existing cognitive service or a closed box service that you can use in the application, and seek to make developers more enabled. Make it faster for them and more rapid to deploy and prototype. But we also have to be flexible in advanced analytics. The way in which these machine learning models learn and continue to learn is through the acquisition of relevant training data. which means that if artificial intelligence is resident in your bot and you want your bot to continue having and supporting fantastic experiences, once you make it go live, you can't stop there. Whatever machine learning models, and it can be multiple models depending on the skills that you give your bot, they're going to have to continually be retrained. It's almost like devising curriculum. What data sets do I need to continually monitor and show my bot? And not only that, but you also have to monitor model decay, right? Decay is a term that we use to determine when the model no longer makes good decisions because something fundamental that taught that model to make those decisions has significantly changed. Right? So super important to worry about artificial intelligence in that regard. So let's talk about bots. Right? Lots of terms to describe bots. It's an overloaded term from an industry perspective, so I thought I'd throw up this slide. So I'm going to start down there on the left. Historically, and we're going back years and years and years, most of us have heard of bots as web robots. These were altruistic programs that were designed to spider through the internet and pull information and be able to do it at a superhuman efficiency speed and be able to index things and show us things, show us statistics. It didn't take long for people to start abusing bots. So black hat hackers began to say, wow, if I can crawl the entire internet, just think with a few lines of Perl code what I could do. I could create a botnet. Right, which is a piece of software that runs unbeknownst to many users on your machine, and it's just acquiring email addresses and sending out spam and doing all sorts of nasty stuff. I can create denial of service attacks, or I can get paid by an organization to make their website appear like it's got 1 million hits when it really doesn't. And then more importantly, I can engage in social engineering, fake profiles and like engineering. If anybody has an Instagram account, when you get likes from a profile that only has 5 pictures, you know something's up, right? So those are malicious bots. We then, a couple of years moved down the road to chatbots, which is the term that a lot of people use today for software that uses bot-like capabilities. But chatbots, to me, typically are a piece of software that interacts with human beings using our language. So there is a natural language processing understanding, which is a brand of artificial intelligence. But the interaction is highly scripted to deal with queries. It's if the user asks me this, I'm going to throw up these 3 responses. And if the user says this, then I'm going to throw up these other 10 responses. And it ends up like you're typing into a web page, and you're eventually, while your fingers are bleeding typing into this bot, you get the sense that you're using words to navigate around a web page. So it's a very broken experience, highly scripted experience. And there are zillions of these things today. And to me, what they're doing, from my perception and what I see a lot of with customers around the world, is it's degrading the expectation and the experience of chatbots and the bot technologies. So that lots of organizations have fantastic vision around bots, but there's not enough attention paid to making them smart enough. And what that really means is modeling a conversation, not thinking about a web page and trying to turn that into a typing canvas so that people have to type in. Being able to move away from scripted if this then that, or rules-based processing. So it's critical to understand that chatbots today aren't really that smart, and as a result, it leads to like VentureBeat and Gizmodo and Engadget saying, has the bot revolution come and gone? Right? Because this is kind of where people stop. What we see a lot of successful customers do around the world is implement smart bots. So this is a capability for it to use artificial intelligence to provide different types of interactions, that somebody has actually given a thought to conversational modeling. There's a skill concept, right? So many of you probably have Alexa at home and realize that there's an entire app store for Alexa called the skills environment that allows Alexa to do all sorts of things, from control your thermostat to order Domino's. Right? So being able to make bots smart enough to understand how to do things, but also how to interact with you in a natural way and in a social way. That's where artificial intelligence really has an impact on how the bot experience is perceived by humans. A lot of people go far afield and say, you know what, I'm going to build a bot that's like your best friend. Like when you come home, it's going to say, hi, Eric, and turn on lights. Fantastic ambition, but takes a lot of programming, a lot of resources, a lot of legal thoughts and preponderance. There's a reason why Microsoft's Cortana wasn't rolled out to the entire world all at once. It was because we had to make sure that culturally that digital assistant could really understand the impact of a joke she told in English versus a joke she told in Spanish. Right? So lots of things to think about there, but we really think about the evolution of smart bots in a grouping of technologies we call conversations as a platform. And we call it that because it focuses the individual on the fact that we really are talking about conversations. We're not talking about typing in web pages and getting back results and having a very scripted dialogue. We're talking about actually having a human-driven conversation. And in a conversation, there's two actors, obviously, but when you come away from the conversation, it's very easy for a human being to say, yes, that was a fantastic conversation I had with that person or that individual. Conversations as a platform really focuses on utilizing technology and artificial intelligence to give people that exact same sense, to have them come away from that experience going, wow, that was fantastic. If you've never implemented a bot before, the best and worst day of your career will be the day it goes live. Because you'll see the logs come in and you'll be like, yes, people are asking exactly what I thought they would, and the bot is finding those exact intents and it's returning the answers, and then somebody says, what can you do? It's the -- question, by the way. What can you do? Because people naturally try to test boundaries and see how, when I'm smarter than this bot, I'm going to see what I can do. How can I break it, right? But at that point, you'll feel a little bit, heartbroken that #1, you didn't foresee that happening, and #2, some people are actually asking really good questions. But it's a learning process. It's an iterative process. Remember, I talked about developer productivity. It's really important to invest and continue to invest. So conversations as a platform is really the area of technologies that focuses on the experience and imbuing the chatbot phenomenon with intelligence and skills and the ability to do things for users. So I talked a little bit about this already. This is how human beings are used to interacting, is through conversations. And so if you're going to jump into the conversations as a platform game, you really need to be good at conversations. And that's not necessarily a programmer's strong point, myself included. Right? I wrote a bot the first time out, and I had a UX person. We have a UX team at Microsoft that thinks about the art of conversation and psychology and all this kind of stuff. And she said, this was a horrible, horrible experience. This was written like you're writing if statements, if then else statements in terms of a conversation. That's not how humans interact. And I said, great, write me a whole conversational engine. I'll integrate it into the platform, and we'll all be fine. But you really are taking on a very, very different platform when you're talking about conversations. But the #1 thing we really need to think about, just as we think about the user experience as visual, being able to see, not all of your users are going to be able to see. Not all of them are going to be able to type, swipe, and be able to use 2 thumbs. So they need to be inclusive in their design. And with conversations as a platform, the goal is to have an API layer. So I think one of our taglines was, bots are the new apps. To which I immediately said, that sounds like marketing hooey, no way. But ultimately, as we're actually getting these things proven out, we do have an opportunity to expose that API layer so that we can actually have applications, whether they're for visually impaired individuals or regular typing applications that are popular, developed or included into talking to this one API layer, which represents the intelligent bot. But as you all are experiencing and people are coming up to you as technologists and saying, hey, I want to produce a bot, you need to ask yourself, how is this bot going to be intelligent? What's it going to be able to do? And what's different than the chatbots of old, or the chatbots that are out there polluting the space right now, or the dumb bots, as I like to call them. So you need to make sure that they just they strive to understand concepts and intent. Intent is easy, natural language processing engine. Concepts is a little bit harder. As an organization, we're doing a lot of research into teaching bots concepts, such as being able to understand, like, the Apple engineer ate an apple, right? So virtually everybody in here can kind of understand that that's an individual that works for Apple that's eating an apple. But a natural language processing engine won't know what to do with that. Right? So we're moving away from the days in which an NLP engine is just going to understand the sentence structure and pull out individual components and then feed that to a bot. So concepts are going to be key. So we want to make sure that that your bots include intelligence. So conversations as a platform should be omni-channel. And that doesn't mean necessarily leveraging a framework's ability to have your experience show up on multiple platforms and multiple devices. That's table stakes, that's a minimum. So it should be able to understand SMS, email, Facebook Messenger, WeChat, WhatsApp, all these different messaging platforms. But your bots should strive to be better than just being able to be reached on those platforms. Your bots or your conversations as a platform solution should be able to maintain what we call ambient context. So as I switch from SMS to Facebook Messenger, and then I go get in my car and I go to WhatsApp, there should be a continuous contextual stream of my chats going across all those devices. So if I'm an order-taking app, I would say, hey, what are your products on an SMS? And then go to Facebook Messenger to say, what's the best product for me? It remembers who I am from the SMS message. And then it should go, as I go to WhatsApp, it should say, all right, I want to order product A or B or C. So that's the goal. Lots of different technology ways to make that happen. Not a lot of things that we normally think about, but the frameworks that you're using, the state persistence and management technology that you're using under the covers should allow that to happen. Most importantly, it needs to be trustworthy and inclusive. So inclusive we talked about. Trustworthy is super important because you want people to be able to feel safe actually pushing the boundaries and interacting with your bot. Meaning that there needs to be some level of disclosure around what you will do with that data and what you won't do with that data. Scrubbing, obfuscating personally identifiable information, making sure it's only used for the intended purpose, that's really important. Part of that trust we found is in the conversations themselves, building that trust into the conversational model. I don't actually have the skills to do that. We have a team at Microsoft that does that part. But we have EULAs and all this other stuff which nobody ever reads, but making sure that people feel trusted, feel that they can have a trusted conversation with your bot is important. But also being able to handle things like authenticated credentials, which we'll talk a little bit about later, is also super important. So let's talk a little bit about skills. Right? And I think of skills mainly as the bot's functions and what it does. And so what we spent the past 6 months doing is grouping these skills into different categories. And then so it really actually we found that it's a really handy way to think about whether or not you're building a chatbot or whether or not you're building a conversations as a platform solution back-ended by artificial intelligence. So the first skill that we see a lot of bots have are informational reference skills. So this means that there's some data source out there, an FAQ, a database, a collection of facts in a NoSQL database store that people are going to want to ask natural conversational queries and get back intelligent results that match their queries. So this is an informational reference skill. This is looking it up, figuring out what the information is and returning that back to the user. So I have a couple of really hard to read examples here, but what's the train schedule for today? Or what are the features of product X, Y, and Z? Very, very basic skill. Actually, with many of the chatbots, they attempt to do this, and some of them actually do this quite well. It basically translates into a SQL query or some other type of query from your database. A transactional skill is one in which we need to actually conduct a transaction in a system of record or a line of business system. So perfect example are book me 2 tickets using my Amex card on file. Right, that is one in which I now need to go talk to a ticketing system. I now need to conduct a financial transaction to clear it on your Amex card. And then, by the way, I also need to let you know that was successful. So we're actually talking about transactional orchestration, transactional entries, as well as notifications. Right, so a very complex system that's going to be required to support that. Advisory intelligence is another one that's important. So this is, remember those foundational questions that typically artificial intelligence helps us with? What should I do? What's going to happen? Is this weird? These are all capabilities, all those capabilities fit into the advisory intelligence bucket. So this is an expert system which eventually boils down into a machine learning model that the bot will consult and return information or recommendations to. So an example I have here is, how much would I save if I got rid of my premium cable channels? Or do I need to add an increased data component based on my utilization of my cell phone data to my current data plan? So these are things that are going off and doing complex algorithmic mathematical calculations behind the scene and returning a recommendation to the user. So this is the #1 capability that will make your bot sticky. If it can actually represent recommendations and next best actions to your users. So very, very important skill to have. Certainly social conversational is important. A lot of customers and organizations get trapped here because it's really easy to say, I'm going to have, again, this bot be your best friend. It's going to be so social, it'll bring you flowers on Valentine's Day. Want to be very careful there. It's terrific to add a little bit of humor, a little bit of engaging conversation, a little bit of unpredictable reactions to certain things, but our position is you don't want to be in the business of creating digital assistants unless you want to be in that business. And when you are in that business, there's a whole layer of concerns, which is why the big guys are the only people that do it. Google, there's Siri, Google Now, which is the Google Assistant, and Cortana and a couple of other ones. But creating a digital persona is not what social conversational skill is all about. It's making sure that your bot, as a digital expert, has the ability to interact with humans and not feel like you're talking to a scripting engine. Authentication, super important. From an authentication perspective, we want to make sure that there's going to be a time in which you're going to need to look very closely at one of your users. So certainly being able to answer general questions, make general recommendations are important, but at some point, somebody's going to ask a question like, access my account and provide me a review of my active services, or when will my network password expire, or increase the data on my cell phone plan to the next tier. So whenever you get those, you're going to need to be able to, in a good way, be able to prompt the user for credentials. Now, if you're integrating with a digital assistant like Google Now, like Cortana, like Siri, there's a concept of, and Microsoft I know it best, so I'll talk about that one. There's a concept of Cortana's notebook. And her notebook has a series of services that are connected. And so if there's a new bot that pops up, I get a notification and it asks me to log in and collects my credentials at that time. So my conversations with Cortana and the digital bot as the expert kind of flow. She knows who I am. She's using standard protocols like OAuth to pass my security credentials to those back-end systems because I've already pre-connected it. But we also need to be smart about how we connect or collect those credentials from users. We don't want to have an experience where we're just prompting people for passwords all over the place. So if I prompted my user for a password interactively on one device or one channel, that should flow through the other channels. You shouldn't switch to SMS and have to put in your username and password again. Number one, the more times you transmit that on the wire, it's risky. And number two, it's just a horrible experience. Workflow, we talked a little bit about orchestration, multi-step business tier logic done within the bot's code or external workflow interfaces. Give me a status on my open service request, or when will the cable guy be here, or how many more steps until my request is approved. This is super, super redundant. A lot of people, redundant tasks that humans have to do that they automatically, even if you're talking to a bot, it'll transfer you to a human being so that they can say, all right, there's 3 more steps in your service request, and then hang up. So if you're looking to, a lot of companies are looking to free up human capital to do higher function work. This is usually the first place that they look. Orchestration of workflow, figuring out when things are, where they are, that kind of thing. So high visibility in terms of being able to implement a conversational as a platform solution in many organizations. So kind of concluding the skill category roundout, a lot of people think that typing and bots and conversations are all the same. They're really not. If you hate typing email and you remember how hard it is to type, it's really horrible. You want the user in a conversation to type as little as possible, as strange as that may seem. And then the worst scenario is if you have complex information to relay back to a user on a text or messaging canvas, the worst thing you can do is just blow up the screen with a bunch of movie times. And the user has to scroll back and say, there's that one I want. So you need to think very carefully about how you're going to present to the users visually. Just because it's a text canvas doesn't mean that that's all you're restricted to. You can actually reply back to users with conversational controls, such as carousels, or buttons, or different input methods that allow people or prevent people from having to type so much. And then we already talked about contextual persistence, like, can you tell me if my account has changed since my original request last Thursday? So being able to remember a conversation across channels and recall that information without prompting for credentials, that's the ultimate experience that you're looking for. So let's talk a little bit about scenarios. This is a great way for me to talk to. Actually, I just used the next couple of slides with a group of lawyers who were the farthest thing away from. They're on the Terminator side of thinking about artificial intelligence. But what was interesting is that just by going through a conversation and then highlighting what the machine sees, really actually helped them understand the realistic possibilities around artificial intelligence and bots. So I have a couple scenarios. They're information reference and advisory intelligence based in terms of categories of skills, but they actually represent a realistic, hopefully a realistic or a real world approach to how bots can, or conversations as a platform can actually be impactful. So this is an example. I think her name is Jen. Yep, Jen wants to determine what the public transportation options are when she's planning her new commute to a job that she just got at Microsoft. So she's outside the office, she's super excited, and she wants to know, how do I get here on a daily basis at 9 a.m.? What's it going to look like? So today, the way that she does it is she opens up her phone and she goes, oh, here's the location in Google or Apple Maps. Oh, double tap on the phone to switch to, going back to make sure I've got the right address, and then copying and highlighting and pasting that, putting it back into Google Maps. Then she's got to email it or link it or save it, or is a very, very challenging experience. So what if she were able to talk to a bot that allowed her to do this? And you might see some Hong Kong addresses in here, so that's actually where I developed these slides. But this bot says, hello, for things I can help you with, type help. She goes, hi, I just got a new job at Microsoft and I want to know the best way to get to work. And the bot goes, of course, I understand. You want to find the best way to get to work. By the way, it's repeating a summary of what she has already submitted, and it already did a lookup to figure out what Microsoft was and where it was, and then so it's asking her all in one piece of text. And she goes, yes. What the machine sees is there's an introductory greeting, but the natural language processing engine of the bot is going to deconstruct the sentence. So in yellow, it's saying, oh, you got a new job at Microsoft and you want to get to work. Those are what our platform calls entities. They're things. And then it says, the blue part is what it came back with. I know you want to get to Microsoft at this address, and you want to figure out how to get home. And this is another intent that says, okay, yes, I understand what I'm receiving a confirmation. So the bot says, where do you live? Or you can just send me your current location if she's using this for the first time, and she tells it where she lives. And it says, well, here are directions from your home to Microsoft. It seems like taking the subway is the best way to get there, right? We've all seen that Google engine that says, what's the best way, the shortest distance, and so forth. And she goes, yes, thanks. So, this is one in which the bot can say, give me your current location. Use your phone's GPS and sensor to send me your location, and I'll do the lookup. And then it's now saying that, here's where she lives, right? So it's extracting the information. It's using its natural language processing engine to figure out the parts of the sentence that have the information it needs. And then it replies back. It says, here are the directions. It seems like taking the subway is the best way to get there. If the service that actually gave us the directions didn't tell us the best way to get there, we could actually shell out to a machine learning algorithm and feed it 2 GPS points and say, what's the best way to get from point A to point B using mass transit or driving. And a yes thanks is that's a gratitude intent that the bot can pick up and say, yes, she's happy with me. So she goes and the bot says something generic like, I'm here anytime. Would you like me to remember this route and your addresses for next time? To which she says, sure, and it says, okay, I'll remember your address. What's not here is that it would say, well, if this is a first-time user, log in with Facebook, Google, Microsoft, whatever it is, and I'll save it, right? So there's that account authentication and authorization component, and then it's the provisioning of her as a user in the bot's back-end system, and then being able to have it remember who she is. This is an example of an individual that's an expatriate coming back to, in this case it was Hong Kong, but coming back to a country, and he's interested in learning about how to get a driver's license. So how he does it is today he would look up the Hong Kong government services, navigate to the English version of the website, which is consistently horrible. I actually did this, by the way. It's horrible for English-speaking people, rather. And then be able to figure out where the driver's license center is. So he goes, "Hi and welcome. What can I do to help you with today?" The bot goes. He says, "How can I get a driver's license in Hong Kong?" And it says, "Driver's licenses are issued by the Transport Department in Hong Kong." We should all recognize this as a informational reference skill. The bot was asked a question and it went to its list of facts and said, "I understand that he's asking about, how can I get a driver's license?" And it returned driver's license information, and now it's asking, "Do you have a driver's license?" Because it's actually going to engage in branching logic here. If you have a driver's license, then I'm going to take you down one path. If you don't, then I'll take you down another path. So he goes, "Yes, I do." And the bot asks, "What country is it from?" And he goes, "The US. And he says, "Okay, well, since you're from the US and you have an established driver's license, I'll just need you to fill in the application form." And then he undergoes a follow-up conversational query. Remember now, what's interesting about this is the bot is remembering the conversation to this point and knows when he asks, "Where is the Transport Department?" what context that he's asking it in. And it says it's located here. And so here are all the decorated elements of this conversation. Yellow are the natural language processing skills, capability to extract from the question what it is that he's asking about and the entities associated with that, the things, and what his intents are. And then so it's responding back with that reference information and detecting the thanks. Thanks is the gratitude intent, and then it's saying, "Yep, I'm here anytime." One last example, this one is a recommender example. So someone's come to the Hong Kong Board of Tourism or whatever the tourism board is in your town, and they're interested in figuring out what they should do. Basically, the way that the government reads this is where you should spend your money. So they were super enthused about doing this. So this is somebody that's going to visit the city, and they're looking for suggestions on things to see. Would you be interested in attractions involving architecture, skyscrapers, or religious or cultural sites? And we're asking and answering. So this is the bot gathering information so that it can actually make a recommendation. So the bot says, "Would you be interested in attractions involving amusement parks?" Sure. So this is what I recommend, and I didn't paste the recommendations in here. But you can kind of see that this is one in which the bot is gathering information and supplying those as parameters to a web service that sits out front of a machine learning model. And the machine learning model is actually making these recommendations in the background and returning them as hopefully intelligent and visually appropriate recommendations to the user in a carousel or something that's not just spitting out recommendations on the screen. So what did we just see? We saw, in Jen's scenario, we saw informational reference. The bot went to look something up. Went to look up addresses. We saw a potential for authentication when it asked if she wanted the bot to remember who she was for next time. So now it knows where her home is. So that when she goes back, it can actually answer. And social conversational. We saw that gratitude element. I'm here anytime to support you. If you need help, ask for help. In Tuan's scenario, I'm not sure. I didn't name these people, by the way. So Tuan, we saw advisory intelligence. This is one in which it made a recommendation, it employed branching logic, and it said, "Here's what I think you should do." Same with Chris's scenario, which was, "Give me a bunch of information or facts about you, and I'm going to come up with a recommendation." All of these are those foundational capabilities, those machine learning model capabilities that are exposed through the bot, that made the bot intelligent, that made it the experience a good experience, and left these individuals hopefully walking away saying, "That was a fantastic experience. I can now count on that bot. Right? I'm going to go back to it whenever I need it." So a little bit of technology here, not too much. What makes this all possible? Microsoft has cognitive services. IBM has a very similar package of services. But ultimately, this story ends with the way we began the conversation. Being able to take foundational and groups of machine learning services that are configurable or customized based on your own development, and implementing them as part of a conversation, a designed, curated conversation. And by the way, making sure that it's operationalized so that as people are asking questions, you need to capture those misses. So when a bot can't actually ask a question, you need to be able to say, "Aha, there's something here that it couldn't answer." The second part is mapping what it couldn't answer to a new intent, right? Is this really another way of asking the same thing? So in your natural language processing configuration, you'll say this question is the same as this. And without recompiling, hopefully, if you're using the technology stack right, your bot can get smarter just by recompiling the NLP component of your bot and not redeploying on it. So focusing on conversation intents and entities and sentiment analysis and others, making sure we're doing recommendations, that's what really makes it possible. Certainly you're going to need an application framework. That framework needs to host the code of the bot. It needs to be able to integrate with directories and data sources and do ingestion and constant training, but also be able to scale out. And it also needs to be able to have a framework itself that allows the bot to extend its presence to multiple channels. You certainly can do your own channel development. That's probably like writing print drivers for me when I was out of college. It's horrible, horrible work. You want a platform that allows you to do those types of things and that has a strategic alignment with where you want your bot to show up and how you want it to show up. So this is the only Microsoft-centric slide, hopefully, that I had in the deck. This is the Microsoft bot framework. Again, there are lots of other bot frameworks out there that actually run on Azure. The bot framework, I think, just recently was announced that runs on premises as well. But these are all the different channels that we had at the time the slide was created. But ultimately, it's a framework that does all of those things. It hosts a bot controller. It establishes, it has what's called a bot connector service, which is the go-between, the cloud-based go-between between your logic and your apps, which basically is an MVC app underneath the covers with a controller that talks to all these different channels. The discussions and negotiations with the channels are all configurable and all supported by the framework. So it's less work on the circles on the top of the screen and more work on the circles on the bottom of the screen, which is your logic, your apps, your services, your artificial intelligence. From a solution landscape perspective, we see a lot of our customers that want to extend this to their customers. And again, there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And we're consistently advising a lot of our customers, take your existing solutions, think about them in terms of skills, invest in API management, invest in exposing those skill sources with an API layer, and allow the bot to be able to talk to multiple channels, but at the same time allow us to talk to your ERP system. Allow us to talk to Salesforce, to Dynamics, to Office 365, to SAP, and then actually watch as this bot takes center stage in terms of being able to understand English language and being able to be the go-between multiple systems, orchestrating multiple transactions across multiple line of business systems. So that's the talk. Any questions? This is a good talk. How many people think this is a big Microsoft commercial? All right, I did it. At least I did that. Well, thank you very much. I was happy to be here and come talk to you guys today. Hopefully this was valuable. If you have any questions, I think we have maybe like 15 minutes. Happy to chat. I think we're going to have a microphone go around, but if you just want to shout out questions, I'll repeat them for the recording, and we can kind of go from there.
You mentioned it a little bit, but can you speak about authentication and how security fits in? So somebody's screaming through the window, like, please unlock the doors. How can you build in from the get-go some of these authentication practices, or how can you switch between different screens or apps or platforms to ultimately let the person do what they're trying to do? Sure.
So the question, I think the question was heard. So if you're trying to determine the right way to get credentials from a user, there comes a point in which the conversation has gone to a point where I need to look something up personal about you. So let's take the classic example. You created a digital bot that's a digital expert for your company or for your organization, and it knows about accounts. But it needs the credentials in order to be able to access the accounts and truly unlock its skills and capabilities. The more complex scenario is integrating that bot with a digital assistant, like let's say Cortana. So the example I gave was in Cortana, you can actually go into a notebook and say, I want to link to these services, and oh, by the way, here's my bot. I'm going to click on that link and put my credentials in at that time. That's one integration point. The other integration point, or where you prompt or challenge for credentials, is when you've gone through as far as you can conversationally, and you now need to log in. So on the canvas, wherever the channel allows you to, you're going to collect a username and password, much in the same way that you would do it as a website, with a login and a password. If it's multi-factor, there's frameworks that allow you to do multi-factor as well. But the goal would be to maintain that OAuth token in state and be able to pass that to downstream systems internally that allow you to access the account. So it really depends on the right time and way in which you prompt for those authentication passwords. You want to do it as little as possible, and you hopefully won't do it across multiple channels because that would create a broken experience. But anytime that you have the ability to collect them up front and remember them, that's always going to be better. So it's not a lot different than websites. It's just that it's basically a headless web page if you think about it that way.
Does the same thing apply to when this is a type bot conversationally versus spoken?
Yeah, so if it's a type bot versus spoken, absolutely. If with voice, we've seen a challenge in acquiring credentials because putting in saying your password out loud is a little weird. But being able to have XL123 exclamation mark hashtag be understood by a natural language processing engine or a authentication engine is challenging. So for voice, we actually recommend customers do multi-factor authentication, which is you'll get a little text on your phone, you put your thumbprint in, and then you're in. Right? So the bot makes a request, an authentication request to your IDAM system on its behalf, and then it gets you in that way. But voice, username and password is not really optimal. Question back here?
Yeah, I was curious if there's a different conversation about, for lack of a better term, like sensitive topics when it comes to something as conversational as a bot that might feel like a real person. So, for example, in your Hong Kong situation, somebody asked, how to get to their new job, but what if they were asking, where's the best place to buy illegal drugs in Hong Kong? And then it's just like, oh, I hear you'd like to find illegal drugs. Is that right? Well, yes. Oh, well, this corner is
right.
Rather a great place. Like there's, right. That's finding a taxi is one thing, and then and you could certainly extrapolate that to like even more sensitive topics.
Right.
And so I'm curious about that because I feel like something like Googling for illegal drugs in Hong Kong feels a lot less personal than a conversation with a human thing.
Yep.
And maybe somewhat related, if you're willing to talk about it, is there anything you can say about Tay tweets?
Yes, absolutely. So don't let me forget Tay, okay? Because I actually it's a good story. But what's interesting psychologically, I feel there's a lot of confidence that human beings have when they talk to something that they know is not a person. It's really interesting reviewing the logs as to what people will actually disclose to a bot. Because they know it's not a person, and I guess psychologically there's not that judgment there that somebody else is instantly going to be thinking that I'm weird. So what we're doing at Microsoft is we're working with our legal group to determine if we're running a bot, like Tay, for example, and we start to see things like, hey, I need help, I feel sad all the time, or hey, I'm going to commit premeditated murder, whatever it might be. What is the organization's responsibility when we see those things? And then potentially, if the skills were appropriately able to come up with some type of response, what kind of liability do we have in making sure that we're not actually giving advice to somebody that's going to commit premeditated murder? Hopefully that will never happen, right? The bot will be like, sorry, I can't help you. But once it's in our system, what do we do? And so a lot of it is very similar to what we would do if somebody typed those searches into Bing or Google or any of those things. And so we're doing our research and saying, well, can we get the bot classified as a search engine in that regard? And then we have a liability pattern to follow. So very, very interesting discussions. You'll see, if you review the chat logs, some of the things that people ask you in a work environment are just downright scary. But yes, there's a certain amount of honesty and lack of judgment, I guess, that's inculcated into the bot experience that you won't believe some of the things you'll see. So it really depends on how authentic you want to make that skill, and then what the liability is if you start seeing those things happen. Something very important to think about. In our own experience, we actually have a page on our website about what happened with Tay. At Microsoft, our culture is very growth mindset oriented, meaning that we're less about pointing fingers and making sure people get fired because when something goes wrong, but it's what did we learn? Did what we learned, through the process of our learning, did it cause harm to individuals or groups? If it did, apologize. Then talk about how we learned and how we're going to move this forward. So there's actually a really good article on news.microsoft.com if you type in Tay. There was an apology for being overly enthusiastic and for that bot, saying those things that it did. Ultimately, behind the scenes, at some point we're like, man, this is horrible, but the technology worked better than we would have ever expected. But now we know that we have to put guide rails, that we actually have to figure these things out before we just release intelligent bots to the wild. So hopefully that answered the question.
Similar to the first question, how would you prevent the bot, assuming you've already authenticated yourself and everything's fine, you're using it, it's working, how would you make it so that, like, say, for example, your child couldn't then suddenly start using it? Is there a way to lock it down or prevent your voice from being recognized from somebody else?
It's a good question. So this is the iTunes problem, right? So your kid plays with your iTunes phone and downloads a game and now charges $50,000 in gems. Don't know if there's a good answer to that one. So it's always tricky, especially with a device. I think if you think about this in the context of the device, that's the most personal element of computing that we have today. Something that I actually hold in my hand, and it's supposed to be secure because it's got a fingerprint reader and it's supposed to lock people out of it. So a lot of organizations feel fairly confident that computing device is probably the most secure, even more secure than your laptops, although we now have, this laptop understands who I am just by looking at me. But so biometric authentication is certainly something that we count a lot on, and I think we're going to count on it more and more. I'm not a security expert, but some of our security folks say that biometric authentication is the worst authentication in the world because once its hash is stolen, you can't go get a new thumbprint, right? So lots of problems to worry about. I would liken that concern to what happens if my kid gets into iTunes and buys $50,000 worth of gems in Candy Crush. So I don't think I have a good answer, but I understand the problem. Question right here?
Hi, I want to ask, there are the words, they have an emotional context. So we interpret the same word differently when we put it to a context. Like what can be a surprise or what can be just a simple word, what you are asking. The same way when we are saying that the interaction with the bots has to be more human rather than like a if then else or a machine talking to us. So does the bots, do they have a capability of putting the words contextually and emotional context associated with it?
So I'll talk about Microsoft's platform because I know it the best, but there are other analogs out there. So at Microsoft's platform, we have sentiment analysis and text analytics. So those two engines are in those cognitive services engines. They're closed box machine learning models that allow you to feed it a sentence or what we call an utterance, which is basically something you type in or say. And it's designed to evaluate what your emotional state is or the emotional state is underneath those words. This stemmed from social media monitoring, by the way. So if somebody would hop out there and start to tear Xbox down on Twitter, we are farming all those Twitter feeds and determining whether or not they're favorable, unfavorable, angry, happy. So we took those capabilities and actually built them into a closed box machine learning service that you can integrate into your bot. So one of the classic examples that we have a customer we're working with right now, their goal is to build a bot experience so that when you come to their site and start typing stuff in, the more frustrated you get, the sooner that the bot will say, I'm sorry, it seems like you need to talk to a live human agent. Let me hand you over. And by the way, that doesn't mean that the live agent comes on and says, hi, how can I help you today? Right? That would be awful, especially to an upset individual. But the live agent would be able to review the chat, and just like you add another person to a messenger chat or whatever it is, they come into the conversation, they can review the chat, they have all the information right there, and they can actually reply and respond. And what's interesting is we can now take those logs and figure out what made that person upset, and then how we can actually have the bot deal with those in the future. So to answer your question more directly, the inclusion of a cognitive service, whether it's your own or frameworks, of sentiment and text analytics will actually make the bot really understand that somebody's upset, or somebody's happy, or the conversation's going well, or it's not going well. I think we have time for a couple more.
Can you talk a little bit about how you test these conversations? A lot of the questions are around kind of the quality of the conversation. So how does that change the way we've done testing before? We know how to test APIs, but how do you test conversations? How is that different?
Oh, that's a big question. All right, so 3 dimensions, I think. The first is making sure that the natural language processing AI module has been trained appropriately. It'll be horrible if you go to production and your natural language processing engine can't understand what people are talking about. So the NLP engine has to be of a specific threshold or higher. Typically, we shoot for 90 to 95%. And in any NLP engine, once you compile it, it'll tell you, hey, I'm at 78% based on your intents and your entities that you want me to figure out. Or I'm at 90%. I'm pretty sure that I'll understand anything that comes in as long as they follow these conversational utterance archetypes. So that's the first step. The second step is actually going through and doing a ringed release. So as you're doing development, certainly being able to put those conversations in front of the business stakeholders and the actual audiences is going to help. So as you're going through your sprints, getting them to talk through the conversations and test it as quickly as you can, capturing any new utterances before you hit that initial release milestone, recompiling the app, making sure that the confidence interval associated with the NLP engine is significant enough. Then when you do release, you want to follow a ringed release strategy. So a ring release strategy is what Microsoft does today, which is we have fast rings and slow rings, and those rings have different populations associated with it. Our fast rings are people that want to go fast, right? They're more likely to forgive a conversational faux pas just to be able to talk to a bot, right? So that's a small ring. You then take your NLP engine should have the facility to calculate hits and misses. So anytime that it was hit, you'll get like a positive ping on your NLP engine. Anytime something that was missed, it should come in, and what Microsoft's platform does is instead of making you crawl through logs to say, oh man, look what was missed, it'll actually take those, use the NLP engine to make suggestions for new intents and entities. So by the way, if you guys are following along, this means you now have to have an individual or team that's monitoring the NLP engine, right? Because that's a wealth of information, but if nobody's processing those suggestions or changing things or adding new intents and utterances, remember that how we talked about operationalization? The bot's stickiness is going to go way down. So it's confidence on your NLP model. It's showing the conversation to users sooner rather than later, and ring-controlled releases where you integrate all the learnings in those ring releases. I think we have time for one more if there's any more questions. Yeah, right up here.
A conversation is like an interface to an application. Could you talk a little bit about what makes a good candidate for using that sort of user interface? Because it's only appropriate for certain kinds of information in certain kinds of applications.
Yeah, good question. So I think it really depends on the experience that you want users to have. If somebody goes, wouldn't it be terrific if I could ask a question and the bot would respond, would be terrific. If you're trying to manage a IT operations queue or a ticketing system, probably not a good vision to try to take that entire app over. But small elements like answering small questions like, where am I in the queue? Or how many steps do I have to go through until I get this fulfilled? Probably a great example of this is if you go to support.microsoft.com, today you'll actually see a bot there that's responsible for helping your mom install her printer, right? Which is a common scenario. So being able to go through workflow and try to deflect what people will ultimately call up a human and ask are probably really good candidates. But sweeping visions where you go, all right, this is ripe for bot replacement. I think we can throw AI on this and it'll just replace it. Probably not good scenarios. Probably don't have a more specific answer for you than that, but really think about the experience and then what you're actually trying to do. Bots today represent really, really good add-ons, augmenters, ways to help people deal with complex systems rather than replace systems entirely. Terrific. I think we're just out of time, but I'll hang out here as long as I can if you guys have any other questions, but it was great. Thank you.